I'd like to welcome everyone here this afternoon. At this time, we'd appreciate if you turn your cell phones off or turn on vibrate. And this is a public hearing to adopt the tentative millage rate and budget. The purpose of this meeting is to set a tentative millage rate and a tentative budget. The proposed Walton County Board of County Commissioners countywide millage rate is 4.1060 mills and 0.4912 mills for North Walton Mosquito Control District. In aggregate, this is a 18.40% increase over the rollback rate. The rollback rate is the rate that would essentially generate the same ad valorem tax revenue as last year. The countywide 4.106 mills, which was applied to the general, county transportation, fine, and forfeiture in an increase over the fiscal year 2012-2013 rate, which is 3.5563 mills. The 0.4912 millage rate for the North Walton Mosquito Control District is the same as fiscal year 2012-2013 rate, which was 0.4912 mills. Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board. The first slide I'd like to show you is the major changes that the staff has put into place based on your guidance from the last workshop we had in August. Next slide. You can see in this slide.
This is actually a public hearing, so we'll be open to the public.
Make a motion to open the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Commissioners, the first slide shows the major changes that have taken place since the August workshop. You can see that we've added $1.767 million to the solid waste budget. Majority of that was for the $1.6 million for the condo garbage collection that you approved here just recently. And also we added in the north side remediation and took out some of the equipment to help balance that out for a total of $1.767. Also added mobile health department operations at your request and the Saturday library operating hours. And then we made some adjustments to the Freeport fire services, which resulted in there was gains and losses there, but the net result was an additional $21,000. Next slide. This slide shows you the total budget. Next slide. The differences from last year to this year is approximately $14.4 million. This slide will show you some of the highlights of that. I'd like to point out that the bridge, $6.46 million, does not impact ad valorem taxes. That comes out of the 1 cent sales tax, a half-cent sales tax. The TDC likewise does not impact ad valorem taxes. That's from the bed tax collections. The building department has a slight increase. Again, that does not impact ad valorem taxes. That comes out of the building permit fees. The sheriff's office is an increase of $1.68 million. And then the condo garbage again does not impact ad valorem taxes because it comes out of the solid waste fund, which is to the 1 cent sales tax. The remaining $1.8 million, the majority of that, it comes out of increases in retirement rates. For the county, that's about $1 million over what it was last year. And then the increase in Medicaid, $250,000. Next slide. This slide shows what the impact of the tax rate that you decide to set will have on our reserve fund balances. You can see across the top there the different millage rates from 4.106 down to the current rate of what it was this year of 3.5563. And we have 4 major funds. The solid waste fund is not really affected by the millage rate because that comes out of the 1 cent sales tax. As an example, if the millage rate was set at 4.106, it would leave a general fund reserve balance of a little over $10 million for the general fund, and that's where we try to keep it around that figure so that should we have a hurricane or other type disaster, there's enough funds there to cover until FEMA money would kick in. And then you can see down the line, road and bridge and fine and forfeiture, how they would be affected by the millage rate. Commissioner, subject to your questions.
Any
Mr.
questions?
Demers, as far as the general fund reserve, that also has an effect upon our credit rating and our ability to bond and borrow money.
Yes.
Okay, and Gary, am I right, when you and I were discussing that this morning, did I hear you to say that if we did not have, if we unfortunately had a tropical storm this year, I'm not going to use the H word, and we needed to, we could take out of TDC reserves and replace it with FEMA money, is that, or some reserve other than?
I don't know, we could take it out of there. I think in the past we borrowed money.
Borrowed it and put it,
Put it
back
back.
once we got FEMA money, okay.
Any other questions? This is a public hearing. Anyone here would like to speak?
There's a man.
Yes, sir.
I want everybody to hear me.
State your name for the record.
My name
sir.
is Larry Semerad. I live in Santa Rosa Beach. It's 66 Dalton Drive. It's a sand and gravel road with a number of potholes. And as I see proposed property taxes going up, I wonder why. As you know, the economy has been very slow over the past 5 years. And I recently heard a report on National Public Radio, actually it was last Tuesday, which cited a study from Florida International University saying that adjusted for inflation, the Floridians' median income has dropped 11.5% since 2000. My wife and I, Sandy, work harder for less money. We've been doing this for the last 5 years. I have personally worked twice as hard for half as much. In order to pay our 2012 taxes, we had to dip into our limited savings. When I called the tax collector's office, I was told when I asked for an extension with a payment plan that if we did not comply immediately with the taxes, our house would be placed on auction. So, of course, we complied with difficulty. And that's why I'm here this evening, asking for no tax increase. Rather than an increase, I'm asking for a reduction in property taxes. Like me and my wife, many Walton County residents are also struggling financially. And I'm here this evening on behalf of all of us. We believe property taxes should be reduced at least 10%, not raised, to reflect the decrease which many, if not most of us, have seen in our incomes. I ask you to do the fair thing for the hard-working taxpayers in Walton County. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Jackie Markell. I have a question and a comment.
Jackie, pull the thingy down. Thank you, ma'am.
I have no problem with the higher millage rate personally. I appreciate the services that it provides, and I don't want to see that drop.
Which one?
The higher millage rate, the 4 point, whatever the one was on the left.
4.106?
Right, 106.
Oh, okay.
I just have a question. I missed the meeting, so you may have discussed this and I missed it. But did we not have a budget for some new code officers in the budget?
That didn't make it in.
Didn't make it in.
And I'm just curious, with the woefully inadequate staffing for code and so much request for code enforcement from the public, why would that not be budgeted in? I'm just curious about that. Because I think if, like Commissioner Meadows, at a lot of the town hall meetings you've been at, that I've been at too, that is one of the main topics of discussion at those meetings, and I'm just curious why on earth we are not adding, as building starts to pick up, there's more activity, we're getting more tourists coming down, et cetera, businesses are increasing their volumes, we're adding new businesses. I mean, why are we not keeping up with code enforcement staffing?
Y'all want me to pitch in here? Or you want-
Well, I probably can't answer the question, but I can tell you that as we move forward with some assessments of our organization, we hope we locate and identify some areas that may allow us to beef up our code enforcement if that's where we so choose. So there may be some more opportunities in the next 2 or 3 months that will allow us to do some things.
Yeah, I think too is that we talked about looking at code a different way. We talked about looking at the ordinance and perhaps making it not complaint driven, but
Enforcement driven.
enforcement driven. And we take the top 5 or 6 issues, and I think we're looking at those, and we make sure that, you know, that's happening. And that I think that we felt like that until we get a handle on these kinds of things, that we didn't want to just add more people.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of the bottom line, is that let's use who we have, but let's use them more efficiently, and let's tweak some of the ordinances that perhaps are not being enforced or that are being enforced and that don't make that big of an impact. So I think that's why we excluded any additional personnel.
And it's not only personnel, it's personnel and vehicles, you know, new vehicles. So I think, you know, Mr. Jones is right. Until we get a handle on it, and we need to, and I think we're working in that direction, you know, we can free up some money.
Well,
you know.
I'm glad to hear that, but let's not be penny wise and pound foolish
Yeah.
on an issue like this. I think the staffing has been woefully understaffed. During the slow time, when the economy tanked, that was one thing. But now that we are picking up, I think we are only going to see more areas where code enforcement is going to be needed. And when you say there might be some other opportunities, what does that mean exactly? Like what?
We're going to do some assessments throughout our organization of our current assets and our current staffing levels. And as we move some things around, there may be opportunity to shift some funding and or personnel, not personnel bodies, but FTEs into code if that's what the board so desire.
Okay.
We haven't identified that yet, but
Okay.
that's certainly one of the things we're going to do in short order is do
Okay.
some assessments.
I just ask you not to be penny wise and pound
Yes,
foolish
ma'am.
on this one.
One other thing that we're doing too is we're meeting on these different ordinances, and we're trying to close the gap between how does it become a violation and catch it in the beginning, so that our guys are out there looking at it either while it's being built or, you know, just, and make sure that it doesn't go down the road and then become a code violation.
Well, that's encouraging.
So I've met with Mr. Jones a couple of times on different ordinances where we can close the gap in the very beginning.
Okay.
And so, you know, we're looking for some efficiencies there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? Yes, sir.
My name is Chester Carter, District 1. I'd like to speak against any increase in taxes. The constitutional officers in this county have devalued my land, but my millage is up. I don't understand how my valuation could go down and my taxes go up. Could you explain that to me and to other people in this county? So, I think you people need to tighten your belt and do like the rest of us and live within your means. That's what I think. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm J.B. Hillard, resident of Funiac. I have comments and questions. On the slideshow you showed a few minutes ago, on the TDC figure and also the bridge figure is about approximately $8.5 million. That is being shown as one of the reasons for the tax increase. I've spoken to Mr. Jones about this and briefly to Mr. Bagley, and I'm not satisfied with the answer I'm not sure what the answer was, to tell you the truth. But you have a bridge tax and you have a TDC bed tax that pays those fees, yet it's being included in the budget, which would increase the ad valorem tax. There's some kind of hocus pocus there I don't understand. I'd like for that to be explained, and how can you carve that out because it's already being taken care of with sales tax and bed tax. But is this an unintended consequence that when we have these sales tax and bed tax, and you include this in the budget, that it increases the ad valorem tax too? It doesn't make sense to me.
Mr. Miller,
Mr.
can I
Jones?
have a shot at that? If you take a look at the slide, it says, why did the budget go up, not the tax rate. It says, why did the budget go up over last year? And the county is required to account for all the money that comes in, and the additional revenue that's coming in from the bed tax and additional revenue that's coming in from the half-cent sales tax must be included in the county's budget that's reported to the state, and therefore that's part of the increase of the budget. And it wasn't stated that this was part of the tax increase.
Okay, let me ask you this. If it's in the budget, then you have income to pay for the budget, right?
That's correct, but it's accounting for both your income and your expense, so it has to be added to the numbers that we didn't have last year. For instance, last year's budget time, you didn't have a bridge commitment at that time. So it's going to be, they're going to have to pay $6.4 million on principal and interest this coming year. So they're going to account for the half-cent sales tax revenue coming in and the $6.46 million of principal and interest that's going out. But we have to account for it to the state, so therefore it's added to the budget, but not as a component of your property taxes.
So you're saying it's not figured in the ad valorem tax?
That's correct, it's not.
Is that correct? Okay, I appreciate that. Another comment I have is on the sheriff's budget. He has in there an amount of money for school resource officers. I don't think anybody in this room is against what he intends to do. However, I've read several interviews, public interviews, where he has made the statement that no matter what happens on the whether or not he gets this increase or not, he's going to do it anyway. Well, to me, that tells me there's enough leeway in his current budget without an increase for these resource officers. If he can do it anyway, why is he asking for additional funds? I don't think that should be included in the budget. It should be taken out to help reduce the ad valorem tax and let him work within the budget. He's already said he'll find ways within the budget, his current budget, if he has to. So that should be done. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm Andrew Newitt and from Sandestin. Thank you for the answer, Mr. Enfield, about the reason for the bridge and the TDC budget being increased by those amounts. Are you saying, though, that the increase in the expenses is offset by income from the sales tax and the bed tax?
For those two components, yes, sir.
So it's really, as far as any increase in budget, it's I mean, the income offsets the expense, is what you're saying.
Right, we're required by state statute to report all the income as part of the
Right.
budget. And since this was a new income item for the bridge and an increase item for TDC,
Right.
we have to report it and the offsetting expenses that go with it. No effect on property taxes.
Right. So therefore, the question remains from this gentleman before, why 4.106? Why the increase to 4.106 for the millage, which would bring in, according to Mr. Pridgeon, 18% more in revenue? Why is there 18% more revenue from the property tax? I haven't seen from this gentleman any reason for the property tax being increased. You've answered clearly, the sales tax and the bed tax offsets the increase in the budget. Why is ad valorem tax going up? That's the only question I have, and hopefully that'll be explained. Thank you.
I believe one of the slides you have, Gary, shows why there was the increase in the budget, and at least three of the components dealt with impacts on property taxes. One is the sheriff's budget, the retirement rates, and the Medicaid increases. They had a significant impact on why additional property taxes were needed.
And also, too, I'd like to add to that, if you look in the FTEs, the sheriff is requesting 10 additional people, and he's requesting 1.68 million. Somehow the thing went off, yeah. And if you look at the increases in retirement rates and Medicaid increases, but you also notice that the clerk of court's asking for 2 people, and you know, that's where
I've looked at a lot of charts, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you all have, maybe
Yes.
more than I have, but
That's
I don't
where-
understand that. I mean, that looks to me like it says.
Well, it's very confusing. I agree.
It's not very clear, sir.
It's very confusing because
It's not only very confusing, it just doesn't make sense.
It really should say everything over and above last year's budget
Exactly.
that's not a wash.
Exactly.
Would include.
That's what the staff ought to present to you all as a budget.
Yeah.
They ought to be responsible to present to you, this is last year, this is this year, and this is the reason. That doesn't, what was presented to you, hopefully you all have gotten that information in other meetings and not in this public meeting. And hopefully you understand, because I can tell you that I don't understand it yet.
Anyone else?
Yeah, it's not that good.
Bob Murphin, Inlet Beach. Looking back at my trim notices, I see that this is the first substantial increase in, I think, 4 years in the millage rate. During that time, the CPI has been on average about 2%, 3, 1.5, but about 2. So 8% is accounted for there. We're looking at 12% plus or minus. That's a big hunk at once. I'm sure that you're aware of that, but as folks have expressed, that comes out of people's pockets. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Riley?
Don Riley, I live in Miramar Beach. I'm the president of the County Taxpayers Association, as well as president of my condominium association. JB and I met with Commissioner Pridgeon and Mr. Jones this past week and discussed this budget proposal. And there were questions left unanswered, amongst which are, in particular, there is no possible means of cutting expenditures, existing expenditures. There are no inefficiencies that can be found in the execution and payment for our county government. Somehow, that sounds a bit unlikely. The Taxpayers Association as yet does not have a position on this. I think that it is fair to say that we probably will this coming week. We've been waiting on this hearing to formulate a position paper on this. I think it's a reasonable assumption to say that we're not going to be in favor of any 13% or thereabouts increase in the millage rate. And the question is, should there be an increase at all? We certainly don't believe that a 13% increase in 1 year is warranted. I can tell you that if you want to unite North and South Walton, a 13% increase in the millage rate this coming year is one darn good way to do it. The only expressions that I've heard, both at my condo association board meeting as well as in talking with other members of the community and seeing emails, is outrage is probably the best single word to characterize those reactions. How dare they talk about that large an increase? Whether outrage is warranted or not, I think some disbelief at the very least is. I would urge that y'all seriously consider a much, much smaller increase and send staff back to work on cutting down on this budget some. There are certainly efficiencies that can be found. I think we'd all agree. We may not know what they are, but they're there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
David Smith from Seagrove. Help me understand that the assessed property value went up this year by $600 million.
Is that the number? Hang on a second.
State assessors property.
I think it's in here somewhere. Can somebody have that figure?
Well, my point is this, okay, $600 million. So if you have no tax increase, you automatically have an increase by that assessed value. Am I correct in that? So can't you live within those means all by itself? $600 million.
Let's come to order.
Well, yeah, we need to come to order. We need to come to our senses on this. The system has built in, because of the assessed property value, an increase for you. Please use common sense and listen. And as the gentleman before me said, if you want to unite the North and the South, this is a great way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Judy Crepero from Freeport, Florida. I'm just mostly want to echo what I've heard most of the other people say. When these constantly increase of everything is affecting real people, people are having trouble making ends meet, and if they're able to save anything back every time tax time rolls around, it's gone and more. So just try to figure out a way to do more with less, or either just do less, because it's not sustainable on people to keep. There's got to be an end to it somewhere. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Don Pace, Seagrove. The fundamental fact of the matter is your income is going up 5.2% based upon the current revenue forecast and the current millage. CPI went up 1.9%. Do the math. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Mr. Hudson? You.
Let's at least support her, Brother Matt.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Hudson. I'm a resident of Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. There were some slides that were up here earlier, and people are very confused by one of those slides, and I want to make sure that I understand, and I think I do. there is no difference between the budget between the 4.106 and all the way down to the 3.55. All the difference is how much money we put in the bank above what we need to operate. In a meeting this afternoon, I discussed with Mr. Demers and Ms. Quimby what your reserve requirements are. In other words, how much should you have to weather that storm between October and November when you're not collecting ad valorem sales tax? I mean, you're collecting sales tax, but not ad valorem tax. And everybody says, well, you know, we've been using reserves in the past few years, and I understand we've been using reserves in the past few years, but no one has ever answered that question for me. What are our current reserves? And what do we believe that we need to maintain in reserves? Somebody says, well, we might have a hurricane. Sir, I'll use the word. We might have a hurricane. Well, there are different classifications of fund balance, reserves that you have. Some of those are assigned, some of those are unassigned, some of those are restricted fund balance. My understanding is at the end of last year, you had about a total reserve balance of about $78 million. Some of that is unassigned within the general fund. I asked the question, could you borrow funds from interfund loans, what are called, if you did have a hurricane? And I was told, well, yeah, we've done that in the past. So I'm saying to you today, the difference as far as I can see, there's only about $3 to $4 million worth of true budget increase that's there. And then you've had someone talk to you about the $600 million worth of increase in property values. You can't just multiply that by the millage rate increase because there are other factors that affect that. But the real question to you is this the time to increase your fund balance by that amount of money? I believe you have adequate reserves when you look at the total picture, not just at one small segment of your general fund balance. But ultimately, that's the decision you're making. You're not making a decision as far as I've heard. I've heard no discussion about, well, why are we funding school resource officers? No one disagrees with you that that's a key and vital service. I serve. I'm out of time. Okay. Just one more thing. I served on the school board, and the number one priority that I had was school safety. My question to you is, if it's that important to the school board, why are they coming to you and asking you to fund a portion of their operating budget? How many times are you going to take the hit for increasing taxes to help out another taxing authority? Because if that's the picture that we're in, I serve on a taxing authority, and I'll line up just behind like everybody else and come in here and say, bail me out. I don't want to go up on a millage rate. I'm going to. Don't mind telling you. We'll vote to do that. I will. But those are questions that I think the public needs to understand. What we're talking about is how much more money we throw in the bank, not how much more service. We're not cutting any services. We're not increasing services. What we're doing is throwing money in the savings account. And there are those that have stood before you today and said, I've dipped into my savings account, and asking you not to dip in one more time. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I do have a couple questions.
Yes, go ahead.
You go first.
Okay. Yeah, I had just a couple questions that came up during this. What was the increase in the juvenile justice? Do we have an increase in that this year?
Originally, at the workshop, we showed an increase in juvenile justice, and several counties sued the state and won that lawsuit, and that was reduced back down to no increase.
Okay, okay. And also, what are the revised numbers on the aid to other fire departments budget? What's the total 2014 number that's recommended?
The only one of those that changed would have been the Freeport fire.
Okay.
And that is now going to be
21,000.
No, I think it's 75 or 65, something like that.
$339,848 total.
The total will be $339,848.
For Freeport?
No, for the countywide.
Okay.
For the countywide, so that's down from what we had projected before at 512.
Yes.
We had 512 to 339, okay. Also, too, let's see, the sheriff's budget, the 1.68, where are we on the school resource? Where are we on that, and what are the numbers on that now, on the 6 resource officers?
We have budgeted $444,000 in there as coming from the school board. Our understanding from the paper today was that amount's going to be $307,000.
That's coming from the school board to
Right.
pay for, how much is the total?
Would you say the school board's amount one more time? I didn't.
We budgeted in this budget that you're looking at tonight, $444,000 as revenue coming from the school board. We're now learning that that may be $307,000 instead of $444. So we're going to have a shortfall there. We may have to dip a little further into the fine and forfeiture reserve in order to make up that difference.
Commissioner, if I may, I can address part of that. You received a letter from us, I think in the last 2 weeks or so, advising you of the change in revenue status, projected change in revenue status from the school board based on some mandates they were facing. Obviously, this kind of came at the last minute for us. This is not something we were projecting. I tend to agree with Mr. Hilliard on part of it, which is if it's vitally important and you understand it's vitally important, then you got to put some skin in the game from our standpoint as well, too. One of the things we've adopted is try to adopt some Lean Six Sigma principles, and we're trying to look at some other ways to be more efficient. I mean, I can identify and believe that we can get to at least half of the amount we were asking, about $100 and give or take $35,000 ballpark, try and meet it. So what I'd need from the board. I'm sorry.
What was the total? Sorry to interrupt you. What was the total amount that was needed for this for the school resource office?
For the new add to the school resource office, I believe was $265,000.
That was for the new ones, right?
That was for the new ones, yes, ma'am, that's correct. And what I am proffering is that we'll find a way to come up with half of it. Certainly it will be painful from that standpoint. It's not a situation that won't require some reassessment. So from my standpoint, I would ask if the board, if there's any opportunity to make it and meet us halfway in that regard.
Can I ask
Now,
you?
oh, yes, ma'am.
No, go ahead.
2 things I want to add about that. One is, I've already spoken to the superintendent, and I plan to at some point work with their school board for the future, because if this is going to be an ongoing expenditure, we need to identify a source, and that's just the reality from that standpoint. So that's certainly we're going to have to look at and see that there's something where they can find a way to do that. I'm not a legislative body, so what we do is very expensive, certainly. We're going to try and go back to them and see where we can re-examine that. That'll give us at least a year to project and look into what's available from that standpoint. And as a point of clarification, I just want to add, we actually did not add 10 positions. I'm not sure where that came from. We only added the 6 school resource deputies is what we had.
Okay, that was in a report that we had at the.
We saw that. We actually spoke to Mr. Demers about that.
Yeah. So it's really 6.
At the budget workshop, I thought there was 2 deputies and 2 office positions that were being added. One was in human resources, and I don't have the minutes from that meeting in front of me, but there were 2 deputies, 2 office, and 6 school resources.
No idea. The only part I can think of that has to do with the alternation of people inside. In other words, sworn to non-sworn would be really the only thing I can come up with, because the total FTEs didn't change. The only FTE change from our standpoint was the 6 that we've added. Now, we did add the bailiff that was requested by the board, but that was added last year, so I didn't include that as a new add.
Okay. So your request of $1.68 million, tell me again what that includes.
The majority of that increase are statutory mandates from retirement changes and the school resource, adding the additional school resource deputies. There is a $230,000 IT thing that is in there as well. That's really its end of life cycle, and that goes back to being penny wise or pound foolish. We're kind of at a point now that we want to get on the board cycle of replacing IT before it becomes prohibitively expensive from that standpoint. That's really the majority of it. Has to do with the personnel added, the one added mid-cycle last year and the 6 added this year. So that's
But, you know, for these school resource officers, and y'all can tell me if, is there any way that we could hire part-time people that would go to the schools during school hours, and then, of course, they'd be off on the summers, instead of hiring 6 new people, adding benefits and insurance and workers' comp and all that, and they're going to be not in the schools the entire time?
Yeah, well, you know, that's something we're actually exploring as well. Part of the problem comes from state mandates. It's gotten to the point now that the state requires us to do so much training, and there's so much liability involved with it, it becomes difficult. We're actually exploring the possibility of having retirees, auxiliaries that meet certain level of training as they fill in. That certainly makes sense. The one positive, actually there's multiple positive benefits. From a manpower standpoint, the thing that makes sense to us, at least with school resource deputies, we're able to use them during summertime, spring break, some of those. So we get that double use to them from that standpoint. But we're certainly looking at it as well part-time. And I will say this, when you're talking about students, one thing I think that we've probably done a little better than we have in the past is we're careful about who we put in the schools. You know, we want people that want to be around children, that want to mentor children, that provide positive experiences. So we definitely want people that want to be in there. And I think we can, I go back to your original question, I think we can find some folks, and we're going to explore that as well.
But won't they have to be certified to carry a gun?
It's more, yeah, it's more than certified. I mean, it's more than certified. It's so much training that's required to do that. You know, it's just.
You just can't get Uncle Joe to come and stand in.
Right. Just because you have a concealed weapons permit, you know, we can't use them necessarily to do that. But there are opportunities there. I do believe that for the future.
Let me ask you, you said it's $265,000 to fund the 6 deputies in school.
Correct.
That's additional.
That's an additional.
Additional.
That's six at 265.
Yes, sir.
Okay, 40,000 per deputy.
It's 20,500 is what the school board is paying for 6, or for the 9 total. They're paying 20,500, which is half of the base salary of a starting deputy. No capital cost or anything of that nature in there.
Don't you have to add cars?
You got cars. I mean, what? That's where I'm going.
Listen, we're
and uniforms, and you know, you have to have.
We're from that standpoint, our fleet, we're in trouble with our fleet. There's no 2 ways around that. We are using cars with, I think we have something in excess of 110 cars that have higher than 120,000 miles on them. But we're trying not to come back to you and say, can you buy us cars this year? So we understand that there is obviously a pretty significant cost. The short answer is it's coming out of pool. It's coming out of our pool as long as we can maintain that. But that is becoming increasingly difficult overall. And unfortunately, there will come a point with these vehicles, and I know the board is in the same situation with your equipment that you guys are facing, that, you know, there's going to be a reckoning for this at some point.
Sheriff, in your discussion with the superintendent, as of right now, you're about 137 shy of what it's going to take to fund those SROs.
That's correct.
Has there been any concession on the part of the superintendent to help on that 137,000 that's due, and the fact that 75% of those deputies' times is spent in the schools?
I can't speak to kind of that part. She understands, and we've spoken about for the future about trying to find some alternative funding. My main concern today was to try and keep them as viable. I understand the fiscal responsibility, but that's something we're going to have to go back and work out to the superintendent and school board as well, and say, listen, you know, obviously we want to do a more equitable share in dealing with this, and I understand the fiscal responsibilities that you at the board is facing. I would tell you, if it wasn't such, this is just one of those things, unfortunately, is the cost of doing business for me in this standpoint. But we're going to look at ways to try and find to be more accountable in the way we do it, reassign some folks if that's what it takes. You know, and again, we've had about a month to look at this before we realized this funding was not going to come, the revenue stream was not going to come through. So we're definitely trying to find some alternatives.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions about any part of our budget at all, please feel free to ask.
Thanks, Sheriff.
Yes,
any other questions? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Mary Nielsen, and I do have a question for Sheriff Atkinson and for you all. Are any of the school resource officers afforded or use overtime? Is there any circumstance at all, ever, in their previous prior budgets that school resource officers are paid overtime? Do they have an
Sheriff?
answer?
Sheriff?
Yes.
Come on.
Yes, ma'am. There's some that was scheduled by the school, that was paid by the school board, but unfortunately this year, one of the things we're looking at trying to absorb that is we've had deputies volunteer to work some of these events that they normally have been paid for. We're trying to flex schedules, find a different way to do it. We're not scheduling overtime for them this year. Does that make sense? We're going to try and find a way to either have someone come work additional shifts, volunteer time, whatever we can do as best we can do.
Question 2. What are those occasions that overtime has been used in the past? For what types of activities other than the educational hours during the day?
Large student gatherings, for the most part. I would say that's probably anything that you have something of nature of ball game that gets to a certain size. Football game would be one that comes right off the top of my head.
Okay, so those are social events.
They are.
Okay. My concern to you is I feel that all money for all resource officers, period, should be pulled out of the BCC budget completely. They should be lock, stock, and barrel. The source of funding should come from the school board. You should be paying Sheriff Atkinson and his budget to keep the people on the street, to look at the global needs of our community, but the specific, because the school board is a special taxing district, vehicles are there, there's insurance, there's overtime, there's retirement funds, there's all of this and that for the school system. That should be an entirely line item into the school board budget. They are a separate taxing authority, and we then can look at apples to apples and oranges to oranges. When we're looking at a school board budget, we then can look at what the cost of resource officers are for during the day, during the educational hours they are mandated to be there. Social events should be carried by the parents. We should not be carrying social event coverage on the rest of us. But that is a school board issue, and that's for the hearing about the school board budget. But I think we need to pull out all resource officers out of your budget. It will clean your budget up, it will straighten up some things, and it will put the onus onto the school board. I think it's time to be serious about this. There has been some emotional reaction to what happened in Connecticut, and it's a tragic state of affairs that our country has come to. And I understand the need and the desire of the parents. And I understand the need and the desire of elected officials not to get everybody upset and to provide them what they're asking for. But we are in difficult financial times. I have multiple senior citizens calling me saying, what are they doing to us? What are they doing to us this year? 13%, it's outrageous. I lived on fixed income, and I'm watching all my interest income, the interest rates just going down to the tube till they're almost nothing. So where am I going to divvy up what income I have, and how am I going to pay these bills? So it's not like they can go out and get a new job when they're elderly. They're on this fixed income, and they saved all their lives to have this interest income. I think you need to pull back all those resource officers out of this budget and put it onto the school system. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. I'll give you.
I'll let you finish. I'm probably going to be long.
Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in government. I think a good example of what we're talking about here as citizens is demonstrated by the man that sits up here that we pay $128K a year. When I had my company, if I paid a man $128, and I did, he was accountable. He answered questions. We're paying a man $128K, and we're wondering why we're having to raise taxes when we got 3 more people back here presenting a slideshow. Now, what sense does that make? I don't understand. And I believe some other people here probably don't understand either. If that doesn't make sense to you, then I think you're a long way from the private sector of this country who has to make ends meet. Thank you.
Cindy?
A question is, on one of these handouts, I guess my response would be, don't show me how much money, what the millage rate would be assigned to get the reserves to a certain point. Show me how much money we would have to cut from the budget on each of these millage rates. In other words, if we wanted to stay at 3.5563, what would we have to cut from the budget? How much? 3.75, how much would we have to cut from the budget? 3.9, how much would we have to cut from the budget? 4.1. I agree with Mr. Hudson. You know, we shouldn't be looking at funding our reserves while they're important. We really need to be looking at what our expenses are and how much we're spending and how can we cut those to get to a millage rate that's reasonable. So I guess that would be my question. I'd like to know what would need to be cut, what amount would need to be cut from each of those to get to those numbers.
But also, don't you think it'd be wise to go back and look at what we can work with the constitutional officers and public works, go across the board and see where we can trim some more?
Yeah,
I think that's going to be very important to look at how we can, you know, I'm sure there's ways that we can look at bringing this down some and also looking at reserves. I mean, we need to look, you know, a lot of them have expressed their concerns about, you know, it's hard times. People has to go to get in financial trouble, has to go if they got a savings account to get money. So going to reserves would be like going to a savings account to get money out of to get us by. Till next year, we may have an opportunity to look at it more proactive and looking at how we can put money back in reserves if we have to. So, you know, I think we need to look at how we can trim this down as far as we can get it to go. I don't think we should go below 3.5563.
Well, you know, Kenneth, one of the things that I've been suggesting for a number of years now, and I know everybody wants a paved road. We all want paved roads. Till we get them, then we complain about people drive too fast on them. But we have a great number of roads in this county that we've already paved that are desperate to be maintained. The shoulders need to be fixed. Mowing needs to be done. There's so much that we could, for just 1 year, if we decided not to do any major paving other than something we just had to do. And of course, remember when we're talking about cutting stuff, we've now got to throw in 330A with the hole in it. We've got to put that in the budget somewhere. But if we just did, number one, if we just did maintaining the roads that we have for 1 year, that would cut substantially out of the cost of material budget out of Public Works. I had a discussion this morning with Lewis about travel, how much we spend in this county on travel, even if it's from down, not for a public hearing like this, but for a staff meeting. Why don't we try to invest in like webcams, so our people aren't, first of all, on the road spending gas, because it costs you more to put gas in your tank. Well, it costs the county more to put gas in our tanks. So if we could do webcamming, whatever you call that, rather than having all the staff, you know, drive to the Funiac or drive down here. What's wrong with using webcams? And there again, our vehicles are getting really old, and we need to look at a way of parking every vehicle we can, taking another look at vehicles and how we use them, and because we're going to be in as bad shape as the sheriff before too long. We're going to be desperate, and all of us need vehicles, and the money not be there. I like what the lady said from Freeport said about taxes are paid by real people. If you've ever been in my office, I have a little thingy on my computer that my daughter told me when I first took office in 2006. She said, Mama, because she had gotten her tax bill for the first time, she was newly married and all that, and she says, Mama, taxes are paid by real people. And that's the expression of the lady from Freeport, and that's true, but we're all real people too, so we understand, you know. It's what services do you want us to cut out? What do you want us to cut, you know? I'm willing to do it, you know.
Yeah, I think, you know, I had them run out what we spent as of July 11th, 2013 in certain categories.
Okay.
And I think we need to look at overtime, and other salaries were close to 1.4 million. Health, life, and disability insurance, 3.6 million. Professional services.
What was that for, second one, Cindy? I didn't catch it.
Insurance.
Insurance, okay.
Insurance, health, life, and disability insurance, 3.6 million as of July. So that's almost half the year. It's going to be more because we go to October. Professional services, $1.14 million. I think that we need to get a definite handle on consulting fees, consulting expenses. Some of these contracts are not being well managed. I think we could pinch some dollars there. Other contractual, which I'm sure is waste management, is $8 million. We're going to renegotiate that contract, I believe. So we need to tighten up on that. Utilities, we spend $1,100,000 on utilities, and this is just as of July. We need to look at ways that we can decrease that. We spend almost $500,000 on rentals and leases. Do we need to just give people gas money and say, use your own car? I mean, at some point, the local governments just cannot provide, we just can't keep providing that. Other insurance is $1.3 million. So repairs and maintenance, $1.2 million. Road materials, $4.4 million. Yeah. Operating supplies, $3.3 million. I tend to think that we shouldn't really cut our road paving program, because that's kind of what the government's all about. That's what we're supposed to be providing. But I think statutory contributions are things that we have to put in $3 million that we have to send out of the budget to the state or somewhere else because the legislature said so. And I think a lot of people here tonight talking to us, you need to talk to your state legislature, because a lot of this stuff is coming from them. $1 million in pension in order to make up for the policies that they ran with for decades with the state pensions. So, you guys, us, we're feeling they're passing it on down the ladder, and that's where we are. The Constitution officers, almost $7 million. The court system's almost $1 million, and it just kind of goes on and on. So I think that there's some places that we could look at cutting so that we could get back to 3.55 or 3.75, to me, at the max.
And I tend to agree with you that it's ultimately on our shoulders, but there again, a lot of the public is not aware, like the fine and forfeiture fund. They took it away from the sheriff in order, send it to Tallahassee. Mm-hmm. But yet, in that same day, turned around and put all the cost of the court system, which is, Mr. Alford's bailiwick, on our shoulders. So a lot of the things that we have to pay for and have no choice, we have no control over.
Right, and the legislators have emails as well.
Yeah.
And, they're in Tallahassee, but, they're not, we don't see them. So, so that's what I see when I keep looking at all these numbers. I keep thinking, well, it's being passed down to the very end, and that's us.
If there's any light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully by this time next year, Loves will be online. And that will help us tremendously. With our gas tax money. Loves will be online, next year, which will help with our gas tax.
Yeah,
hopefully.
and speaking of Loves, I think some of the things that we could maybe use that money for is, to fund our part of the EDA, to fund, things like that, to get them off of our plate, and concentrate on roads, fire, police, health.
And it's now not the time topic for it, but I think there again, it's time to take a serious look at the EDA, what they're doing, and where they're going.
I agree.
Because Loves is a result of people in this room and Mr. Jones, not the EDA.
Yeah, I would not argue with that. Yep.
Carlene's.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners, Mr. Jones, Mr. Davis. It's like being in the room and everybody's talking about you, and you're sitting right there, and does anybody notice? Carlene Anderson, Superintendent of Schools for the Walton County School District. All over the state, we have school districts in the same situations we are. Ms. Nelson mentioned emotional decision-making in regards to SRDs. It's happening all over the nation, not just in Walton County School District. What we're seeing this year is, of course, a tight budget in the school district as well as with the county commissioners. Tomorrow night I will be presenting to our board the millage rate and the proposed budget for the school district as well, knowing that we have also an increase which is required by the state. Unfortunately, we don't get to make a choice, should we increase or should we not. In our general operating, there is no decision, should we or should we not. The board and I know fully well that under the required local effort, the state requires it, therefore we must do it. Also, I have to present a budget to the board that has a 3% fund balance. It is my job and my requirement to hand them a balanced budget with a 3% fund balance at the end of this school year, or the fiscal year. In talking with the sheriff about the SRDs, throughout the state you'll find districts who pay a portion, like we do, 50% of the base salary, which has been our common practice throughout for many years. You'll find some school districts where the sheriff's department pays the entire salary. These employees, the SRDs, are not our employees as a school district. We don't hire them. The sheriff hires them, he sets the salary, he sets the he pays the retirement and the benefits. They're not our employees. As I said to the sheriff one day, it's somewhat like rent-a-cop. But I want to be sure that everyone understands that SRDs are not just there for the children. It's great. They're wonderful with our children. In most recent years, as he says, he's been very careful about the selection of who goes in our schools. But the important thing is they're not there just for the children. Within the first few weeks of school, we've had SRDs to respond to one particular elementary school, 2 different occasions where we had to have parents removed, aggressive parents. In another situation in elementary school, we had to have 2 parents who had to be arrested because they were fighting on the campus. These are not students' problems. These are adult problems. This is the fear that we have in education, and it reigns throughout this United States, of people coming and bringing their problems to the schools. These are not our children that are having these problems. We have capable staff, teachers, administrators, who have handled our children's problems for years. Our fear now are the adults that come onto our campus. Our fears now are the people who come to us with their vendettas. That's our biggest concern. If they were not in our schools, the SRDs, they would be responding from the road every time a parent came and wanted to confront a principal becoming aggressive, or to confront another parent in the parking lot and getting into a physical fight. So I just wanted to be sure everyone understood this just isn't for children. What I did this year, we had not planned on the SRDs as of the beginning of last school year, because of Sandy Hook. The sheriff called and said, I'd like you to help out with the elementary for a while. We did that till the end of the year. We discussed again, how can we budget it for this year? How can we do that? Because it's not getting better, it's getting worse with people who come with their fears and their concerns to our schools. And so we took every bit of our Safe Schools money. I used to pay other things out of our Safe Schools money. I put all those things aside and said, nothing's more important right now. We need to take all of our Safe School funds and put them toward the SRDs and try and maintain all of them this year. I even am going to the board, and this is in their budget tomorrow night, and they're aware of it, $80,000 additional outside of our Safe School budget are monies that we'll put toward these SRDs. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, any parents that get in the fight in the parking lot, can't you send them the bill? I mean, if we arrest...
I would love to.
I mean, seriously.
But we cannot. Those are public services provided by our Sheriff's Department. Even if they are on our dime or his dime, it doesn't matter. We did pay overtime last year, and we call them social events. Whenever there is remove the fact that it's a school event. Anytime there's a social event, such as parades, or chautauquas that we've had in the past, there are sheriff's deputies there. Just because when you have a crowd, you raise the liability of something happening. And so take away the fact that it's a school event. It's a large crowd event. There usually are sheriff's deputies there. We did pay overtime last year because we're required to pay when they go over their 40 hours. We're required to pay overtime. With this year, we have no overtime money. I've put all the money that I can afford to give in the budget for the board to consider, with no overtime being paid. We're trying to be very creative by using auxiliary deputies, cutting down the number of times that we ask for deputies to be at these athletic events, other events. We're going to bare minimum on where we put them and how often we need them. And we are going so far as to say anybody who shows up excuse me, in their uniform, we'll let you in the game free, just if you'll help us maintain some order in these events. So anybody that shows up, auxiliary, city police, we'll let them in. Anybody who has a student who's in a child in school and they are with the police department or the sheriff's department and they show up, we will let them in free if they'll just come in their uniform, because that in itself is a deterrent. So we are trying to find other ways to cut the cost of our SRDs. But I did want you to be aware that the purpose of having the SRDs is not just for our children. That's the primary source of concern, is the safety. But the safety includes big people too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have mixed feelings about the SROs and SRDs. On one hand, I question whether or not they perhaps, and the sheriff and I talked about, did do any good. Because if I want to shoot somebody and get in that school, I'm going to find a way. But he also pointed out to me that these kids trust these deputies. And they tell them sometimes things that are happening at home or happening otherwhere that they wouldn't tell anybody else, which, abuse and that sort of thing. I have 2 children at West Funiac. I know what level of comfort it gives my daughter dropping off her children. And the other parents. I've had a lot of parents talk to me about this. And of course, if you're like on my side, when you're a senior citizen, you don't have any kids, it's not so important. But if you have children in school, it's important to them. I'd like to see a way that by next year that somehow the school board could absorb the entire amount, because it is a school board issue, but yet it is a citizen's issue. We're all the family here. I mean, whether you have kids in school or not, the children are all of our responsibilities. And God forbid if somebody broke in one of Walton County schools and shot our kids, what would we all do? We'd all be horrified and wonder where the deputies were. So, that's one of those things that I don't like the increase, but I've somehow got to be able to support it some kind of way.
Mr. Hudson?
Mark and I have had this discussion, and so Mark, we're going to have it one more time. I did serve as chairman of the school board in Dothan, Alabama for 6 years. And during that time period, we began to have guns in schools for the first time. Superintendent of Education called me, I was chairman at that point in time, and said, we need to do something because we're having students bringing guns into our school. And took a recommendation, and that recommendation was that we hire people to come into the schools, that we put magnetrons or whatever you call them that are in the lobby where students had to go through those things. The interesting thing about it was this was a city school system, and I went to the mayor and I said, can you help us out? And he says, you know what, Bob? Y'all set a taxing rate. Y'all set a millage rate. And you're concerned, and your job is the safety of those children. Your job is the education of those children. So all those football helmets that you buy for the safety of students, all those buses that you buy for the safety of students. You don't come to me asking me to pay for those. Why are you here today? So we took some money out of reserves, Mark, and then we budgeted that money the next year. So all I'm saying, I don't believe there's anybody here that has said that SRDs, SROs are not necessary, needed in the schools today. It's all an issue of who is the appropriate authority to pay for it. Is it your job to pay for schools? Or is it your job to pay for the operation of Walton County? When you compare the two budgets and look at the millage rate increases, where have the increases occurred? Yes, state mandates occur, Mark. I understand those. But I do believe y'all have gone up on your local effort as well. And you could have gone up on your local effort to cover this, couldn't you?
I'm speaking as a school board member here, but I will. I think all of our villages will be at the maximum rate allowed by law. I don't know that our local required effort and our discretionary millage will be at the highest amount allowed by law. The only one that will not be will be our capital outlay.
Okay. So all I'm saying is, at some point in time, this body has to say, is it my job to run the city of Freeport? Is it my job to run the city of Defuniak Springs? Is it my job to supplement the school system? Because if your decision is you're going to fund all those things, like I said, South Walton Mosquito Control District is headed your way. Because we'd need, we could use some help too. Y'all take the heat for the millage rate increase. Get it off my back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just, excuse me, real quick. I'm actually not going to speak about the SRD because there's a phrase in Latin that says res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. I believe that's correct. Well, I just want to say real briefly that I'm glad you touched on the issue of coding and amending your code ordinances and that you're looking at that. And I want to let everybody know here that we've had multiple meetings. I think that is really going to pay benefit over the long term. That's forward thinking on your part. And I think that will help as you get ready to decide in the future if you find a position for code. But from a sheriff's office standpoint, that's vitally important because as those folks call us when the music's too loud or they have these issues. So we appreciate what you're doing in amending that. And I also want to touch on your animal control as well. We've had a very close working relationship with them, and we know in the future that as you evaluate how you work with those folks, you'll continue to get our support. So I'm not going to touch on the SRDs. I think we're all pretty clear about where we're at from that standpoint, but I did want to touch on the code importance because I feel like that is very important as well. Thank you.
What's the board's?
I'll make the motion.
What are we supposed to, let me ask a question.
Okay.
What are we supposed to do tonight?
Next. We're supposed to set the,
Mr. Chairman,
Another tentative
we'll need
millage
two
rate.
motions, one to set the tentative millage rate, and including the general rate and the North Walton mosquito control rate, and then the second motion would be to set a tentative budget.
I'll make them, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, a question for Wanda, if I may. Wanda, as you well know how I feel about trying to delve in and using up all the reserves with the end of the start of a new fiscal year. You've got to fund county operations until the ad valorem taxes start coming in. And then the other issue I've always had is in the event of a major disaster such as Hurricane Opal that we had back in '95, that we don't have the reserve funds to pay for whatever we have to do. Now, I believe it was stated earlier, if our reserves on the general fund were reduced and we had a major event, that we could borrow from the other part of it and pay it back as FEMA comes in. I don't know, Wanda wants to address that, Bill, whoever, but that's right now is weighing on me as to what I want to do as far as the budget.
The money that was borrowed in the past from the TDC had to do with the oil spill operations that occurred on the beaches.
Correct.
So yes, that money was paid from that.
And with regards to beach cleanup after a storm, for cleaning up the beaches and coastal dune lakes, and under state law, TDC money can be used for that. However, everything that's clearing the roads, clearing the right-of-ways, picking up all the debris, that's a county function. And I can tell you that when Hurricane Ivan hit in 2004, the county spent $10.4 million before getting back anything from FEMA.
And that's where I'm at. If we have a general fund reserve of, say, $6 million, and that's all, and we have a disaster like that, where do we get the balance from $6 million to $10 million like in Ivan that you're talking about? Where do we get it? Can we borrow it from TDC? Probably not. Jim's shaking his head no. Where do we get it, Wanda?
I don't believe it. We either go out for a loan or we wait until FEMA feeds us the money.
And during that time, it could wait 6, 8 months waiting on FEMA to, and we still got debris, we still got all those issues out there to deal with. Thank you.
Let me just ask a procedural question too. Are we setting a tentative millage rate?
Yes.
And a tentative budget tonight now, and it can be changed at the.
It can go down,
It can go down, but it cannot go up. Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Commissioner Manning?
I'll start. I've heard what everybody said tonight. I'll start with I want to keep the millage rate as it is for one more year, and at 3.5563. And I do think the next year will bring an increase in economy. We seem to be picking up as far as home building and that sort of thing. I mean, I know Mr. Bearden's department for the first time in years is actually making money, which is how they fund it. I think Love's will help us next year so I'd like to hold the line one more year, and I know that's going to dip into reserves, but that's my motion to hold it at 3.5563.
We got to get a second. You second.
I have a question. Is your recommendation then to hold the budget number the same as it was this year? Everybody gets the same amount as this year? Excuse me. My question is, are you holding the budget numbers to the same as it was for 2013, plus the state unfunded mandates they passed down, which, by the way, I noticed there's another $185,000 that they passed down on juvenile justice, at least in the budget numbers here, that we don't set, but the state tells us that they got to pay. So, I mean, we're talking about close to $1.5 million that the state is saying we've got to cover. So,
I think we direct staff to find
that's what I was
a way to find what numbers coincide with the 3 point.
And Commissioner, you were right when you were talking about, a number of years ago, I started a green committee. You were talking about utilities. Everybody ignored me. We came up with suggestions to turning the air conditioner off, turning the computers off. Everybody ignored it because it's easy to walk out. We need to tell staff, you turn your computer off or, So there are ways, maybe there's not ways to find all of it, but I truly believe that we need to look just a little harder. And I understand your position.
And I appreciate where you're coming from, but the point is, once we set the tentative, it can only go in one direction.
I understand.
I would hope that we have a little bit of up, that we can task staff to come and perhaps take it down a little further. But if we go right to what we're at, we've got no room to look at some of the other costs that have come in for this year. That's my concern. I definitely think we need to come down from what was sent out on the trim notices. And I just don't know that by keeping it exactly the same, just as was pointed out, the consumer price index itself went up by some percentages, and we've got to absorb that. We've got to absorb the state unfunded mandates. So rather than take it to that, and I realize you've got a motion in a second, but I'm just concerned that we now have not given staff any kind of flexibility to deal with what's going to have to be new costs for this coming year.
And I understand that side as well. I just,
I think though that
it's just.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cindy. I'm sorry.
Well, with the 3.55, we still in the general fund. That still leaves us $5.5 million in the general fund, and that's without including anything that actually comes in along the way.
Now that leaves us no room to do any special projects to do,
well,
whatever.
We can't afford it.
That's right.
We can't afford it.
We can't afford it.
We can't afford it. I mean, basically, bottom line. And people need to understand too that That's where we
That's where we
are.
are.
We can
Yeah.
provide the essential services,
And that's it.
and that's it.
All right, so if we move forward where you're at right now, then we basically don't need to ask staff to do anything.
Well, I think what Cindy was talking about is seeing what they could cut to keep from pulling out of reserves. Am I correct?
Yep.
That's what the direction
pulling
be.
it out of
Keep,
reserves.
yeah,
To-
figure out what they can cut to
Yeah.
keep the reserves at a
Yeah.
reasonable level.
Right.
Yeah, let's just don't say, oh, we're gonna take it out of reserves. Let's continue to
Can-
look for, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Can we give guidance as to where you would like to see them start? I mean, there are some big increases and some small increases. And Sheriff, I'm not trying to pick on you, but I mean, from an ad valorem tax standpoint, it's one of the larger increases, as is what the state has thrown down on our plate and said, you must pay.
Well, I think that's important, Commissioners, that from a staff position on the components that operate under your purview and under our purview, we're committed to look for every efficiency we can find. But as I mentioned earlier, if we generate those efficiencies, we spoke earlier of perhaps moving to a new code officer. If we do that, as opposed to reducing the amount we would pull from our reserve account, I guess that's the direction staff would like to know, is that where we can save money, do we want to utilize it elsewhere? Do we want to utilize it as opposed to drawing down reserve accounts? And we can have that discussion. But I can tell you, staff is committed to identifying efficiencies where we can, making whatever tough decisions need to be made in order to preserve as much of the reserve accounts as we can.
And I appreciate it, but one of the things I'm concerned about is that if you were to go to the reserves, you're taking a continuing operational cost
agree.
and funding it from a one-time
That's
revenue
correct.
stream, and then we're really handcuffing ourselves for the following years.
And you're entirely right. I mean, if you take the reserve, the general fund reserve down to 5.5 million, the only way you're going to build it back up in some subsequent year is to generate more revenue than you have expenses.
Well, correct, and more importantly, it's gonna have to be the fact that you will also cover a recurring expense that you've got in this year's budget that's
Right.
gonna be recurring next year, but you funded this year from a one-time revenue stream. Now you gotta find the money to pay for that in subsequent years.
And to replenish your reserves if you so choose to do so, right.
Yeah, and if you look at the building permit activity this
Yeah.
year, which will hit, I guess, the ad valorem tax rolls next year.
If it's completed by December 31st.
Right.
Yeah, but
So there's certainly some
Yeah.
things looking up in our favor.
yeah.
And so we know.
I think the future is brighter for us out there right now. You know, I mean, I hear what these people say about, their income. County commissioners' incomes were cut 2 years in a row by the state. Didn't cut their salary, by the way. We understand when you talk about a fixed income, I just, and Bill, I do see your point. I certainly see your point and understand. I just, gosh, know how hard it is.
Yeah, and all I'm trying to do is give,
Right.
is we can always, if we were to come up somewhere between the 3.5 and the 4.1, tell staff to come back and do what they can. At least it gives them the opportunity to factor in those things that we have no control on to cover and see whether we can do that. Again, my bigger concern is that if they come back and says, well, we've got to go into reserves, then that you've got the future problem on doing that. And some of these things are not going to go away. You can tell the sheriff cut your budget, or clerk of the court cut your budget. You can't go tell the state, take back the Medicaid increase, take back the increase you're doing on retirement. We're stuck with that. Right. So I was just trying to think that if we went somewhere in between 1 and then told staff to come back and see if they can't take it down even further, that would give us the ability to have a balance perhaps of using some reserves and using some cost savings and some modifications that Mr. Jones has talked about to try and achieve a reasonable budget that nobody's really happy with, but we all are sharing some of the burden of the increased costs.
Okay, we have a.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
Just very quickly, I think it is listen, the truth about being at the sheriff's office is an expensive business. I mean, it's running jail, sheriff's office, the things that we do is, unfortunately, that's part of it. If you look at our budget as well, when you go down and break it down, statutorily mandated for the most part, outside of the school resource deputies, the pension increases, the insurance increases. Those things you face, we all face that as well too. But during that same time frame, I would ask you to consider this, that, you know, in 2007, give or take, they were doing about 80,000 calls for service. We're going to bump better than 165,000 this year. And we really haven't increased staff. So when you start talking about increasing SRDs, that's not something, as you said, as you will point out, that's not something we use 75% of the time. I just would add that as a caveat from a constitutional officer side standpoint. We understand that the cost of business has gone up as well. So
I think, though, that we shouldn't take the brunt of all the increases. I think if the constitutional officers' budgets are going up because of the state, then they need to go over to the state and start lobbying hard on the cost that they're increasing, just like we do. We go over there. I mean, we can't, do it all. So, it's going to be up to everybody to go
I know
over
we've
there and
taken
do
the
what
first step. We've told the cities and the,
Yeah, we have taken a lot of-
pay your own bills from now on.
We've taken a lot of steps.
A lot of that overtime, and which disturbs me, and has always disturbed me, is sometimes the misuse of overtime with the fire department.
Yeah.
But yet, we have to have them.
Yeah.
They have to be on call,
And I appreciate your motion. I'd like to offer an amendment, and that is to go perhaps where you're going, but to allow the millage rate to be modified for those unfunded mandates passed down by the state, specifically the retirement, the Medicaid, and the juvenile justice costs that are reflected here. And that would give still a mandate to staff to tell us where we're going to take care of the other things. But I mean, those are three costs that are just basically totally out of our control, and they're all increases.
And what'd you just say?
I wanted to amend. You were taking it to 3.5563. So if that's going to be on the table, since it's been seconded, I was going to offer an amendment that says, comma, you're going to have to determine what the factor would be to allow a slight backing up for those costs that the state itself is mandating us to pay. Not any other county costs that we're talking about right now. Staff can come back and analyze what they want to do with that, but
And that would be...
that modifies the 3.5563 to 3.5563 plus whatever it takes to cover those state mandated costs.
Well, are the state mandated costs
I
that
don't-
1.25 million? Is that what that is? The state mandated?
Mr. Bingham, can you calculate that
Could you-
number for us?
No, I'm relying on the finance director for doing it. But however, what it does is, and I know she'd have to do it in the morning, when you add back what the costs are that you've got to come to at 3.5563, then say, okay, to get the new millage factor, let's just add solely those costs that are being imposed on us by the state above and beyond. And then we've got, I'm going to guess it's going to be around 3.6 something that would come in, and that's just a seat of the pants guess. And the reason I say it is I'm taking a look at the difference between the general fund millage rate at 3.75 and the general fund millage rate at 3.5563, and lets us then address the costs that we have some say on, and giving staff direction to work on that before the next meeting, but not just to totally say, we've been running lean for 4 or 5 years, and now we're going to let the state come in and add $1.5 million, $2 million to our costs, and we've still got to run even leaner. And that's what it would amount to. So that would be my amendment to, I make a motion to amend your.
Can you make a motion to amend the motion?
I don't mean to interrupt with the legality, but I think we're going to have to come up with a millage amount, not as
Yeah, we have to.
the statute requires us to adopt a tentative millage number. So.
Well, we got a motion. And a second on the floor.
I don't want to see us do the budget that way. I mean, I think,
I see what he's
they
saying.
could add, I know, but they could add on $4 million next year, and then what are we going to do? Just keep upping it because the state keeps upping our budget? I think we need to.
I don't know if we have any choices when the state is, but what I'm trying to at least accomplish is I'm recognizing the comments we've received from all the citizens.
Yeah, I realize
and
that.
the fact that we're all being hit by this, and we've got to pay taxes ourselves on our properties.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're asking, I go back to the same thing, you're asking for recurring costs to be covered by a one-time funding source, which is going to come out to bite us in the future.
Mr. Hudson, have you done the math in your head?
But that funding, I think these funding sources, I think things are getting better. The gas taxes are going to go up.
I understand Commissioner Enfield's desire. Don't get me wrong, but I think if you'll read state statute, you'll find that you must set a millage rate today, not a millage rate that the staff can adjust as they see fit tomorrow. So if it's 3.5563, it's 3.5563, and you're right, it sets it. But I do want to add one thing real quickly. For those of you who think that your constitutional officers have increases in their budgets, let me read you what their budgets are. Supervisor of Elections is only up 4.06. Property appraiser is down 7.08. Tax collector is down 15.79. Public defender down 25.98. State attorney down 0.84%. And what I'm saying is, if you think you're going to the constitutional officers and cut them back to where they were last year, those constitutional officers have already, it appears to me, have reflected some type of realization that they needed to tighten their belt to some degree. But my only reason for standing up is no, Mr. Davis, I do not believe you can do what Mr. Enfield is asking you. I understand, Bill, what you're saying. You can pick 3.75 and then come down from there, but you can't walk out of this room without.
I agree, Mr. President. What I was trying to recognize the fact that there's a motion and a second on the floor, and if it passes as stated, then we can't then come back at the next meeting and say, oh, we need to bump it up just a hair. I mean, that's the max.
You are absolutely correct, Bill. Once you set the number today, it cannot go up. There are certain circumstances by which it can go up.
And Mr. Hudson, I was really kind of talking about the constitutional officers who were looking to increase their budgets this year. That's what I was really talking about.
That's a very limited number.
It is, but it's
primarily the sheriff's department.
Yeah, but it's a big number.
Okay. Any other questions? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Aye. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, you still got to pass a tentative budget.
Okay.
We need a resolution on the budget.
You have to set the millage rate for the mosquito control district.
Yes.
Yeah, the 3.5563 motion passed, correct?
3 to 2.
Yeah.
Right. The millage rate will not be any greater than it was last year.
Right.
Right.
Need a motion to
Mosquito control? What's the millage rate on mosquito control? But we have to say it, don't we?
It's 4912.
Mosquito control millage rate be 0.4912 mils, same as last year.
So moved. Second.
have a motion and a second? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
You got to adopt the budget.
That's correct. We need to adopt a tentative budget based on
Not
the
need to adopt a
millage.
tentative budget. Do I hear a motion?
That means we can cut it. We just tentative for the budget.
You adopt a tentative budget tonight based on the millage rate that you have set. That's
So moved. Whatever you said.
Motion second.
Yes, sir. Have motion
All right,
second.
and what number are we approving?
3.553. I don't know what the budget number is.
Well, we got the millage rate approved, but
Yeah,
we need now to give them a tentative budget number.
Yes, we need to announce the budget number. That's correct. And I don't know what it is. I'm waiting on those folks.
And changed. It will.
Yeah, but they gave us a scenario for all of them. It should be in here somewhere.
No, the budget number is the same. It's the 100, it's the 122, whatever it is.
Here, 111.
Yes, 111.
It's $111,536,521.
Who's on the motion? You?
Yeah, I made the motion.
Who's that second?
Cindy.
For 111 million?
Yeah.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
We sure?
Aye.
Aye,
Cindy?
yes.
Is you aye, Cindy?
Yes. Yeah, because she made the second. She has to be aye.
Well, you didn't say. Okay.
Yeah. I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Have a motion second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Anything else?
That's it.
We'll be adjourned.
I'm sorry. And you're probably right. You may be right. We better get on our knees and pray we don't have a hurricane anytime soon. Huh? Yeah, see you Thursday, hopefully. If everything works out, and she doesn't want to whack on me Thursday, I'll see you Thursday. Okay, if she whacks on me, it might be a different story. If she cuts on me, it might be a different story, but we'll call it.